Roy Brown spent 15 years behind bars for a murder he swore he didn't commit. But by the time the real killer's name surfaced, time had already done its damage. This isn't just a story about guilt or innocence. It's a story about obsession, survival, and the high cost of truth in a system that doesn't like to admit it's wrong. Armed with nothing but determination and a typewriter, Roy Brown launched an investigation from inside his cell, uncovering evidence that would not only expose a hidden killer, but also unravel the very case that destroyed his life. But when the truth finally came out, it was already too late for some and far too dangerous for others. He was born in upstate New York in 1962, the kind of small-town boy who grew up believing hard work could solve anything. Roy Brown didn't come from privilege or power. He came from the soil, from barns, muddy boots, and long hours under the summer sun. He was known around Cuyahoga County as a quiet, hard-working farmhand, the kind of man who would stop to help a neighbor fix a fence or spend his weekends fishing along the Owasco Lake shore. But life wasn't kind to Roy. He struggled to keep his family together. He fought to raise his daughter, to stay clean, to stay steady. And like many who've known only hard roads, sometimes his anger spoke louder than his intentions. Still, he was not a violent man. He believed in fairness, in doing right by people, even when the world didn't return the favor. And then came the night that would change everything. It was a quiet night in Aurelius, New York. May 23, 1991. The kind of night when the world feels still until a scream shatters it. When firefighters arrived at a small farmhouse on Dunning Avenue, they expected a routine call. But what they found was something no one in that quiet farming town could ever forget. The house was engulfed in flames, and just 300 yards away, in the damp grass of an open field, lay the body of Sabina Kulikowski, a 49-year-old social worker. She had been beaten, stabbed, strangled, and her body bore unmistakable bite marks. The brutality of the crime stunned investigators. Someone had set fire to the farmhouse to hide what had happened, but the killer had left behind something he could never burn away: his DNA. And soon suspicion would fall on a man who had been angry, desperate, and loud about it. Roy Brown, a father who had once trusted the same system that now turned on him. He didn't know it yet, but that night, the night everything burned, was the beginning of a nightmare that would steal 15 years of his life and nearly destroy his soul. Because in America's justice system, sometimes it doesn't take proof to cage a man, just a story that sounds believable enough. The fire still smoldered when detectives began connecting the dots. And in small towns, dots connect fast, sometimes too fast. Sabina Kulikowski worked for Cuyahoga County Social Services. Her job was to protect children, to step into families when something seemed wrong. And months earlier, one of those families had been Roy Brown's. After a long struggle with poverty and addiction, Roy had temporarily lost custody of his daughter. He blamed the system. He blamed the people behind the decisions. And in his frustration, he'd written angry letters, made phone calls, even shouted in public about how unfair it all felt. To the investigators, that anger looked like motive. They didn't see a broken father crying out for his child. They saw a vengeful man capable of murder. Within days, Roy Brown's name became the focus of every conversation. His friends stopped calling. His neighbors stopped looking him in the eye. And soon police were at his door. They told him Sabina had been murdered, that his fingerprints matched the rage she must have seen that night. Roy was confused, terrified, but certain that the truth would save him. He told them, "I didn't kill anyone." There was no physical evidence tying him to the crime. No blood, no hair, no DNA. But there was something investigators did have: a bite mark. On Sabina's body were several deep, brutal bite marks. Prosecutors said they were entirely consistent with Roy Brown's teeth. It didn't matter that one forensic expert had already excluded him because Roy was missing his upper front teeth, something the bite marks clearly required. That opinion was quietly buried. The new expert, the one who fit the prosecution's story, became their star witness. And so, in a courtroom in early 1992, the people of Cuyahoga County watched as Roy Brown, a man with no history of violence, was painted as a monster. When the verdict came, It hit like thunder. Guilty. Second-degree murder. 25 years to life. Roy stood there frozen, the words echoing like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. He looked at the faces of the jurors, at the prosecutors, at the judge, and realized the truth didn't matter anymore. That night, the cell door slammed shut behind him, and for the next 15 years, the world forgot his name. In the beginning, prison broke him. 15 years to life for a crime he didn't commit. Roy Brown spent his first night staring at the ceiling, wondering how truth could die so easily in a courtroom. He'd lost everything: his freedom, his family, his future, and the world had moved on without him. But some people crumble in prison. Roy didn't. He studied, he watched, he learned. Every day behind those walls, he began piecing together the puzzle of his own life. He had no lawyer, no team, no money. Just a typewriter, a stack of old case files, and an unshakable belief that somewhere inside the system, buried beneath the lies, the truth was waiting to be found. He began reading every document from his trial, every police report, every forensic note. And what he found made his heart pound with anger. The bite mark evidence, the foundation of his conviction, was deeply flawed. One expert had said those marks couldn't have been made by Roy's teeth. He was missing several upper teeth, teeth the killer would have needed to make the bite pattern on Sabina's body. That expert's opinion never reached the jury. It had been quietly replaced by one that fit the prosecution's story. Roy realized then, this wasn't justice, it was theater. So he turned himself into a detective. For years, he wrote letters, hundreds of them, to journalists, scientists, lawyers, even strangers, begging someone to listen. When no one answered, he kept going. He learned the Freedom of Information law and used it to request hidden documents from the sheriff's office. And that's when the pieces began to shift. One file stood out, a name buried in witness statements that no one had ever mentioned in court: Barry Bench. Bench was a man who worked near the victim. He was known to Sabina, and his own life had dark corners: abuse, temper, and violence that had never been fully examined. Roy's gut told him that Barry was the man who had killed Sabina Kulikowski. So Roy did something no one expected. He wrote Barry Bench a letter from prison, a long, furious letter that said everything the evidence couldn't, that he knew the truth, that one day everyone else would too. Weeks later, Barry Bench was found dead. He had taken his own life. And suddenly, Roy Brown's wild theory didn't seem so wild anymore. Still, suspicion wasn't proof. He needed science. He needed DNA. In 2004, after years of letters, the Innocence Project took on Roy's case. They obtained the evidence: Sabina's nightshirt, the one with the bite marks and saliva stains. And when the results came back, everything changed. The DNA didn't belong to Roy Brown. It belonged to Barry Bench. 15 years after the fire, the truth finally had a voice. Roy had done what the system couldn't. He had solved the crime from inside a prison cell. When the DNA results came back, the truth was undeniable. The saliva found on the victim's nightshirt, the same evidence that prosecutors once said didn't exist, didn't match Roy Brown. It matched Barry Bench. 15 years too late. 15 years after the trial that stole his life, the system finally whispered the words Roy had shouted from his cell. He was innocent. In March of 2007, a courtroom that once condemned him now set him free. The judge vacated his conviction, the charges were dismissed, and the same community that once turned its back now stood in stunned silence. Reporters crowded around him, flashing cameras, shouting questions. How does it feel to be free? Roy didn't smile. He just looked at the sky. Because after 15 years of breathing concrete air, freedom didn't feel real. He'd missed his daughter growing up. He'd missed birthdays, seasons, years of sunrises behind prison bars. And the man truly responsible for the murder, Barry Bench, would never face justice. He was already gone. Freedom for Roy Brown came with ghosts. He said, "I knew I didn't do it. I just had to wait for the world to catch up." But the world didn't give back what it took. It couldn't. The state of New York eventually compensated Roy for the years it stole. Money that could never equal lost time, lost memories, lost peace. Still, he used that freedom wisely. He spoke out against wrongful convictions. He talked about the lies that built his cage, the bad science, the lazy investigations, the indifference of power. And every word he spoke carried the weight of a man who had lived the nightmare and survived it. He was no longer just a victim. He was proof. Proof that truth can be buried, but it never dies. It waits quietly for someone brave enough to dig it up. For a man who spent 15 years behind bars, Roy Brown didn't waste his freedom. He spent the rest of his life telling his story, not for sympathy, but for change. He stood in front of students, lawmakers, and journalists, warning them about a system that had nearly destroyed him. He spoke about the power of truth, the failure of forensic science, and the quiet horror of being innocent in a place built for the guilty. He wasn't bitter, just honest. Because when you lose everything, the truth is all you have left. Roy never became rich. He never became famous. He lived simply, quietly. Still the same farmhand at heart, a man who once fixed fences and believed in fairness. But inside, something had changed. He carried scars the eye couldn't see. Years of nights spent alone in a cell, replaying the sound of a gavel that said guilty when he wasn't. Freedom gave him air, but it never gave him peace. In July 2019, at the age of 58, Roy Brown passed away in Florida. No spotlight, no headlines, just silence. But the story he left behind, it didn't fade. Because every time a jury reconsiders a conviction, every time DNA sets another innocent person free, his fight echoes in the background. He became a symbol, not of tragedy, but of endurance, of how one man armed with nothing but determination and faith exposed the cracks in a system that's supposed to protect us all. Roy once said, "If the truth is there, you can't stop it forever." And he was right. The truth took 15 years to reach him. But when it did, it burned brighter than the fire that started it all. So when we speak his name, we don't just remember the man who was wrongfully convicted. We remember the man who refused to disappear. Because Roy Brown didn't just survive injustice, he defeated it.